But first, at the beginning of November, Mike Comerford started riding a bicycle in Bar Harbor. His plan is to keep riding south until he makes it to Key West, Florida, a trip that will likely cover more than 2,500 miles. Comerford is a journalist, and he's doing the trip not for fun or adventure, but to interview ordinary people all along the way to report on what they think about climate change. Rob caught up with him in Kennebunkport about a week and a half into the trip to talk about his big goal and his daily routine.
Well, I started out of shape, so I'm going to get in shape on the road. I've gone a couple hundred miles already, and I'm sleeping out at night.
You told me that you sometimes sleep in cemeteries.
That's right. Hello, people of Orland and people of Waldoboro. I've slept in your cemeteries.
Sleeping in a cemetery, just that alone would get a lot of people wigged out.
I was, yes, Day of the Dead, I was in the cemetery. The night of the Day of the Dead, the Mexican Day of the Dead, I go, well, this is thematically, if I get killed tonight.
What a way to go.
This is it.
I've talked to a lot of people who have bicycled from Maine to Florida, Maine to the West Coast, wherever. I don't think I've ever talked to anyone who started in Maine in November, who began the trip in November.
Yeah.
You probably won't be out of New England until Thanksgiving or maybe later. You're taking a big risk with the weather.
I know. I sent my bike ahead to Bar Harbor, and the bike people there that got it, they looked at me and they said, "Aren't you afraid about the weather?" I've done 2 trips in winter, and so I have winter gear. Well, we'll hope that it does okay, but I've ridden through snow and sleet and rain. And
the reason you are doing this trip is to talk to people along the way about climate change, get their stories, see what they're thinking. What do you ask folks? What do you want to draw out of them?
I start with their childhood. I say, what was it like? What was the weather like when you were a kid? And think back, and it was in November. You know, was it was it snow up to your knees, or was it freezing, or was there ice out on the ocean? And the answer usually is yes, absolutely. And now it's 75 degrees, and I'm getting a lot of answers. And once again, I won't know the meaning of them until I get to the end.
The sign is a key part of your gear. This is the way you sort of break the ice and get people to come to you and tell you stories, right?
Absolutely. I've had people come across the Walmart parking lot saying, "Tell you a story, you tell me a story." And I go, well, listen, I have to explain the project, but I've got them talking already. And so, and a lot of people are very generous with their time. And there's a lot of good people out there.
In a typical day on the road, Mike Comerford rides anywhere from 35 to 80 miles and interviews about 3 people. He has been inspired by this man, Paul Salapak, an award-winning journalist making an epic, years-long journey on foot through Africa, Asia, and the Americas.
Why am I doing this? Why am I taking this path? It's basically an effort to try to slow myself down as a storyteller enough to immerse myself into the stories of everyday people.
Salapak calls what he's doing slow journalism. That approach struck a chord with Mike Comerford.
He and I had a dinner one night, and we talked about slow journalism. And this is slow journalism. So the slower I go, the better. If I'm going 100 miles a day, I'm not getting interviews and the context that I should be getting.
So the slower you go, the more color, the more telling detail,
absolutely,
the better storytelling you can do.
Right. I would be, a real biker would be out of the state, and I would never have met you. By now, I left nine days ago and only have ridden 200 miles.
Comerford is working with an oral history project at the University of Florida, which will keep the video interviews he does as he asks people on this trip about their thoughts on climate change.
We're seeing the effects of climate crisis all the time. What we can do about it, I don't know, but I do know that by listening to ordinary people, we'll be able to find common ground. and we'll understand each other more. We're living in extraordinary times, and I'm talking to ordinary people about them.
Again, I'm not an expert long-distance bicyclist, but I look at this skinny little seat and I think of going from Bar Harbor to Key West on that seat. What are you thinking?
Oh, you know what? You're right. I'm quitting today.
There are, I bet, a lot of people who say to you, I wish I were doing what you're doing.
There are moments where it's idyllic. It's like, I can't believe I live in such a gorgeous country. Yeah, you're right. I feel privileged and honored to be alive.
This is by no means Mike Comerford's first big trip. He's visited about 100 countries, and his latest book, Beast of Main Street, tells the story of how he rode a bicycle along Route 66 during the pandemic and asked people about COVID. To learn more about him and his Maine to Florida slow journalism project, just head to the 207 section of our News Center Maine website or our app.